Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, August the 9th, 2023. I just talked about the Manson murders and the killing of Sharon Tate. And in that video, I tried to remember, where I was at the time of the Sharon Tate killing. I was 7 years old, and I thought, well, I must have been on a family holiday in Italy because I know we went to Italy that summer. But then I realised I wasn't in Italy. I couldn't possibly have been in Italy. Reason being because I remember writing a birthday card to my grandfather. His birthday was August the 12th, 1890. That's when he was born. So it would have been probably a few days before August the 12th that I was sitting outside a shop in Surrey in front of a sort of a green of some kind. The place was actually called Bear Green near Dorking, and I was writing his birthday card, and I wrote, "I hope you live to 100." Those words really stuck with me. It was his 79th birthday, and unfortunately, it was his last birthday because he died the following November. So that was, was a bit upsetting, and that seems unwise to go and ask someone to wish someone a very, very long life, but hoping they live to 100. You're asking for it, aren't you? Anyway, he died a few months later, and then I was looking at his details on the internet, what I could find, and then I found mention of his brother Henry. I think he was called Harry in the family. And Harry, my great uncle, he was killed on May the 10th, 1915, possibly May the 9th. I think I found a regimental diary and it suggested he went missing on the 9th, but the date that seems to stick is May the 10th. And so I wanted to consider his horoscope. Obviously, I don't have the time of birth. I do have the day of birth. He was born on August the 8th, 1892. So the question I'm kind of asking here is, what is the relationship between collective events and individual ones? I mean, if you think about it, during the First World War, millions of young men were killed every day. Thousands were getting killed day in, day out. I think in one incident the British mined a German trench, and I think in one explosion they managed to kill 10,000 Germans. I mean, that is just extraordinary. I don't think those 10,000 killed in that explosion would have had similar charts. I don't think their charts would have indicated that something terrible was about to happen to them. So this was my question with my Uncle Harry. Given I can create a basic birth chart, admittedly without an ascendant, without a midheaven, can I see anything which indicates his death? And I also want to consider his brother, my grandfather. My grandfather was, by all accounts, completely devastated by this. I mean, I suppose as one would be if one's younger brother had been killed. He wasn't in the army. He was a priest. He was a Church of England priest. He baptized me, actually. This is an example of, well, it is a memorial that my grandfather put up in memory of his brother. There you go. In loving memory of Henry Charles Maclean Farmer, 2nd Lieutenant. killed in action, May the 10th, 1915, aged 22 years. This figure of St. Michael is placed by his brother. I think the reference to St. Michael is because it was the Church of St. Michael and All Angels, which I think is in Waddesdon, which is a village in Buckinghamshire in the UK. So that that gives you an idea about what I'm looking at. So now let's look at the chart. So here we have there is Uncle Harry, great Uncle Harry, and here is his horoscope. I don't really want to focus too much on his horoscope because really, we don't have a time of birth. I don't know very much about him, except my mother said he wanted to be an actor, and that is really all I know. Obviously, he was. He must have been reasonably intelligent. Going to Eton, and Trinity College, Cambridge. Of course, it was probably easier to get into Trinity College, Cambridge 100 years ago than it is now, provided you came from the right background. So that fits with Mercury and Virgo, sextile Venus. That's a very talented sextile. So maybe he could have been an actor or an artist of some kind. You can see that Mars in Aquarius is pretty close to the Mercury-Venus midpoint. So that looks talented, as if he could have done something quite amazing with that. As far as his personality is concerned, the only thing I can find about his personality is, in a way, it's pretty awful because it comes from the worst possible source, which is his senior officers. What they said after he died. So, for example, Colonel Brownlow wrote, "He worked hard down here and was very keen to get to the front. And Captain Field, he was in my company the whole time he was at Sheerness and King's Ferry. A most excellent, cheery fellow, and a very conscientious, good young officer." Well, I suppose you could say that Sun in Leo might be a cheery fellow, but maybe they said maybe they say that to everyone. Anything else? Well, from a generational point of view, when you look at this kind of chart, you perhaps should consider the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. He was born with Uranus in Scorpio. So, if you were born for much of the 1890s, that's where Uranus was in Scorpio. Uranus is about the capacity to perhaps rebel. It's about shocks. Scorpio, I suppose you could say, is about death. And this is how this mini generation perhaps became different through their sacrifice. Of course, there were people being killed in the First World War who were not born in the 1890s. But I suppose that generation of people born in the 1890s, they were the young men who went to the front and very often didn't come back. So yeah, they all had. Many of them had Uranus in Scorpio. Also, there's a Neptune-Pluto conjunction. We're used to there being a Neptune-Pluto sextile. Been one of those for a long time. But here we have Neptune-Pluto were conjunct. So Pluto, of course, had not been discovered at this stage. This was just not discovered until 1930. So Neptune is the capacity to, I suppose, dissolve. To sacrifice oneself to something higher than higher, and Pluto is about transformation. So you could see a quite destructive potential in that Neptune-Pluto conjunction. So that's what he was born with. I'm not going to go into other stuff going on in his chart. Okay, we don't know exactly where his moon was, but middle of Aquarius, Moon-Mars conjunction. So as far as the events in his life are concerned, we do have two events in his life. We have the day he enlisted, the day he became a soldier. And so, what was he thinking? What was going on in his head when he became a soldier on that day? Here we. So this is on the outer wheel. Is the time is for the day when he enlisted, September the 3rd, 1914. Now we have to remember, at that time there was massive excitement. All these young men wanted to join the army. That's when people weren't aware of the horrors of the First World War. So he wasn't exactly special enlisting in the army. But it does show that he was part of the collective enthusiasm. And you'll notice at the time this was going on, there was a wide Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Jupiter was at 14 Aquarius, Uranus was at 8 Aquarius, and the midpoint of that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction was about 11 and a half Aquarius, which was on his Mars. So he had a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction hitting his Mars. Jupiter-Uranus, Ebertin says that the Jupiter-Uranus can be the principle of thank the Lord, and his Mars is how he asserts himself. So he was probably feeling quite good about that. He was really perhaps relieved that they'd taken him on. He was a soldier now. He was enlisted. He probably felt really good about it, and his, all the enthusiasm that comes with his Mars. There was another thing going on. Maybe at some level he did have some doubts, because you'll notice that there's a conjunction between Saturn and Pluto. Now, Pluto going into Cancer was just really important for this whole tragedy of the First World War. Pluto tells us very much about what's going on in society, about the kind of transformations that people are experiencing in society, the things that people are obsessing about in society. And when it's in Cancer, Cancer is the nation. It's about patriotism. It's about wanting to do what we can to protect our group, or in this case, protecting our country. And Pluto in Cancer would be obsessive patriotism. It really is. It is sweet and honourable to die for one's country. And this Saturn-Pluto midpoint was semi-square his sun. And as you know, I regard semi-squares as being really important. They're similar to squares because you've got 90 degrees and it goes down to 45 degrees, which is a semi-square. So he had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction semi-square his sun. I don't know. I think he might have had some doubts somewhere along the line. He might have maybe felt traumatized at the same time as being elated. I mean, that's kind of weird. He just didn't. Yeah, he was probably a little unsettled, but I suppose, like everyone else, he was carried along by it. So maybe there's something a little bit individual going on on that day. Then we have the day he got gazetted. So here's a chart for when he got gazetted. So what gazetted means is, as I understand it, there was this thing called a London Gazette, and you had all these announcements and whatever. And so when you get gazetted, it's when there's an announcement that you have become an officer. So that's when when it was publicly announced that he was an officer, a second lieutenant. And this, so in a way, this was perhaps the public start of his tenure as a second lieutenant in the British Army. And you can see that Moon is in Scorpio. Terrible place for the Moon, particularly early Scorpio. The 3 degrees Scorpio is, the worst place for the Moon to be. And this Moon is making a 90-degree aspect to Uranus. So Moon square Uranus, that's that's suggestive of accidents, disaster, things just happening, things happening unexpectedly. And yeah, but that Moon in Scorpio, I think that's not good. That is not a good chart to become an officer. So that's the background. These two events: him enlisting and then being gazetted, and then we've got his death. So his death, as I said, he died either on May the 9th or the 10th of 1915. So I wanted to just show you the chart of his death. I wanted to compare Great Uncle Harry's chart with the chart when he died. Again, with the okay, sorry about this. There's his natal chart, and we're going to do. Okay, so. Okay, this is his death chart on the outer wheel. Again, we don't know when precisely he died. I've taken it as midnight, like the midnight, May the 9th, May the 10th. I don't find anything particularly spectacular in this chart, except I am slightly interested by the position of Pluto. Pluto is at 042 Cancer. It is moving to a semi-square of his Sun. So his Sun is around 1620 Leo. So yes, so Pluto is semi-square, starting to move to the semi-square of his Sun. So perhaps there's something going on, but otherwise, I don't find it. I don't find it very impressive. But transits are not the only thing to look at. There's also the question of solar arc directions. So the solar arc directions do give us perhaps a better picture. Let me just okay. There's his chart. So we now do by wheel solar arc directions, which is there. So in his natal chart, Uncle Harry had a 45-degree aspect between his Jupiter and his Pluto. So you can see that his Jupiter was at 2453 Aries, and his Pluto was at 939 Gemini. So Jupiter, Pluto, 45-degree aspect. So what does that mean? Well, it can be about a massive desire for self-improvement. That's very nice. I don't know how hard he worked at university. I don't know what his aspirations were. Okay, maybe he wanted to be an actor. Maybe he was working hard at that. Maybe in terms of the army, I don't know whether he was a good soldier or not. His commanding officer, his senior officers said nice things about him. But that was something in his chart. Now, this Jupiter-Pluto semi-square had directed to, in other words, this is, you click it 1 degree a year. So if he died at 22 and a half, you would move this Jupiter-Pluto semi-square, you'd move it 22 and a half degrees. And so when we move it, we see that Pluto has moved to about 134 Cancer, and Jupiter has moved to 1648 Taurus. And in other words, this means it hits his sun. So his sun is here. So directed Jupiter was exactly square his sun, and directed Pluto was exactly 45 degrees from his sun. Now, that directed Pluto links with transiting Pluto, because transiting Pluto was at around about 1 Scorpio. So Pluto was hitting his sun in two different ways. And to my mind, that Jupiter-Pluto was the direction. If you're just looking at directions, was the direction which killed him. That was the one that did it. But we must remember again, this is a collective event. But I will show you very soon that what seems to be a personal direction is actually a collective direction. And this starts to become clear when we look at his brother's chart. So here's his brother's chart, my grandfather's chart. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but you can see that my grandfather, in some respects, had a difficult chart. There's his Mars in Sagittarius, opposition Neptune. Mars opposition Neptune, square Saturn and Mercury. I'm thinking, I'm thinking that in some way this represents the trauma he experienced, and I don't think he wasn't a soldier. He was just a Church of England priest. But yeah, we must look at this Mars-Saturn, the Mars-Saturn square, and maybe if we had the time of birth, we'd get a better idea about where that Mars-Saturn was reflected. This Mars-Saturn shows up in his solar return for. This is his this is his solar return for August the 13th, 1914. So just as the First World War was starting, on his birthday, August the 12th, 1914, we get a repeated theme. We see that Mars is square Saturn. So if you've got Mars Saturn in your natal chart, and then you have a solar return, and Mars Saturn turns up again, this indicates that the year ahead could be quite Mars Saturn. Now, if he had been in the army, that might have been and was going to the front. That would have been really scary to have that. But then, if his brother's going to the front. Yeah, we know how it might well have happened. And then we look at my grandfather's solar arc directions. And if you look at my grandfather's solar arc directions, we start to see the collective element here. I think this is potentially. I think this is potentially quite important. So you'll see that his solar arc directed. You'll see that his solar arc directed Pluto is 1 degrees 39 Cancer. So it's kind of solar arc directed to the Aries point, and his Mars Neptune opposition. Um, there's his Mars Neptune opposition, and again, it's coming to the Aries point. Now, the Aries point is like the world at large. And so if you've got Mars-Neptune opposition directed to the Aries point, this may be the point where you get caught up in a global collective trauma. Even if, like he did, he was not a soldier, he still got caught up in it, and he still got traumatized by it as much as if he had actually been on the front himself. And if you look at his Neptune and Pluto, now Neptune and Pluto are very slow-moving planets, and I can illustrate this with by comparing the two brothers, the charts of the two brothers. So if we look at the charts of the two brothers, which is so my grandfather is in the middle, my great uncle on the outside, and you can see that because these are slow-moving planets, Neptune and Pluto, both got the Neptune-Pluto conjunction. Now there will be a whole generation of people who have got their Neptune and Pluto conjunction around here. All these people born in the early 90s. These people who would be in their early 20s in 1914. And then we do the count. So the Aries point, remember just how important the Aries point is. So you could say that for my great uncle, you could see that the Neptune-Pluto conjunction is about 20 degrees from the Aries point, from 0 degrees Cancer. So around his very early 20s, this is when Neptune and Pluto sort of roar into life. Likewise for my grandfather. Same, he was born 2 years earlier, so you count 22 degrees. And so basically they, like all those people born in the early 90s, had their solar arc directed Neptune-Pluto conjunctions moving to the Aries point, with Pluto being directed to 0 degrees Cancer. And of course, transiting Pluto was moving into Cancer as well. So I think with this direction, what I'm trying to say is that it is personal, but it's also collective. And so this kind of goes back to my original question with my great uncle. Was his death something collective which goes beyond his natal chart, or is it can we still see something personal there? But by looking at the Aries point, we can actually see that it's both. A lot of people had, for example, had this Neptune-Pluto conjunction, and it would have would have directed into Cancer at the same time. And so that mini generation of people born in the early 90s would have experienced the same thing, and their death could then be explained by their natal chart, or in my grandfather's case, not his death, but his brother's death. Anyway, thank you for indulging me. I'd noticed this thing about my great uncle, and it was his birthday a few days ago, and which made me think. Which, in fact, it was his birthday yesterday, which made me think about it, and I wanted to make a video about it. Again, I know it's indulgent talking about my own family, and you might say, well, it's of no interest to anyone. But I'm just hoping that what I'm talking about might have some wider use, particularly if you're perhaps into genealogy or you want to understand what your ancestors were like, were doing, thinking, what was going on astrologically for them, even if you haven't got a time of birth. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.